decades that I've been doing this, because you talk about solutions, as they're called, but it kind of passes a lot of people by because it's not what they want to hear. When people talk about solutions, it's like we must do A, B, C, and D. We must have a meeting. We must take minutes and stuff like that. But as I'll get into, there's no solutions coming from there. The action that we take comes from the attitudes we have, the perceptions we have, and how willing we are to take personal responsibility for what's happening instead of passing it on to other people. And in terms of talking about positive things, what is more positive than what I've been pointing out all these years? That we are not our bodies, we are not our names and our life stories, they are our experiences. We are infinite awareness, a state of being aware. How aware is the decision we make on what we allow our perceptions to be. But beyond the manipulation of perception, we are still infinite awareness, having experiences. We are still eternal awareness. There is no death, just leaving the vehicle, the body. I mean, how much positivity do you want than that? And this is one that I had. And some were very nice and very respectful, and one or two others weren't. But I'm used to that. So a guy calls himself Stevie Sleuth. Why are you so addicted to fear and use that to promote yourself? How about working on solutions instead of the problems? Now that, after a quarter of a century of this, is a classic. First of all, do I look addicted to fear? If anyone should be frightened after what I've uncovered over the years, it should be me. But I'm not frightened. And it's funny how people relate fear to uncovering things that we need to know about. Because if we don't know about them, and therefore do not have at least the opportunity to do something about it, then they go on happening. And if you look around the world and you look at all the expressions of this global network that I'm exposing in terms of the horrors and the reasons to fear, well, that's what happens when these things unfold, with most people having no idea why they're happening or what's behind it, except what the mainstream media has told them. And so if people choose to be in fear of what is uncovered about what is behind them, well, that's their problem. And it's their decision. You can look at it in fear, oh my God, or you can say, fantastic. Now I'm starting to get an understanding of what's happening and what's behind it and the methods that are used to manipulate me. So thus I can be a lot less manipulated than I was before. That's a great thing. That's one way of looking at this information as it comes to light. Another one is, oh my God, shut up. You're frightening people. Well, stick around if you're talking about frightening people and see what's happening. Get even closer to its planned end. And then there's this idea that exposing the problem can be somehow divorced from doing something about it. I've always found that very weird, personally. Okay, I've got some solutions. Oh yeah, what for? For what's happening? Well, what's happening? Well, I can't tell you, or I'll be promoting myself through fear and frightening people. Can't tell you, but here's some solutions. What are you talking about? How can you have solutions to something you don't know what's going on? Go away. So, a massive, massive part of bringing an end to this global manipulation and its endless faces and facets is to expose A, that it's going on, B, what's behind it, and C, the methods of manipulation it uses, so we stop being manipulated to do its will, believing that we're not. It's extraordinary. How do you change something if you don't know what needs changing? How can you stop being manipulated by something if you don't know that something exists and you don't know how it manipulates? So massively part of the addressing of what's going on is to know what there is to be addressed. And then there's this idea I get from some people here and there. Oh, well, you know, you said that before. I've heard that. And your point is, there are billions of people in this world, billions of people, who have not had access to any other explanation of the world and world events than the mainstream. And so what we need to do to challenge that is to say things once and put things out once, and then that'll sort it, won't it? Those who are really committed to making a difference keep putting this information out in different forms, in different ways, over and over and over and over again, because they know that there's the vast majority of people in the world have never had access to it. So you keep putting it out, and every time you put it out, you get someone else who hasn't seen it before. Oh no, I've heard that. See? Me, me, me. Another expression of the me-centric world. Okay, you've heard it. Okay, what are you going to do about it? We'll wait for you to give us some solutions. Here we go, round and bloody round. We tend not to like hearing solutions that involve personal responsibility, and thus they kind of go through, don't register. See, he never gives any solutions. And anyway, the world is drowning in solutions that lead to other problems that then demand other solutions. Wouldn't it be a good idea if we remove the cause of the problem? I think that would be more effective. So what is the problem? It is the program, as I call it. It's the programmed perceptions of the human population who have been systematically put before that programming and subject to that programming from the moment they entered the world until the moment they leave it, through education and the media and all these things, science and medicine, all these expressions of the system that are telling you what is, what isn't, what's possible, what's not possible, what's credible, what's not. And when you challenge these assumptions of the system, then they just fall before your eyes. And you suddenly realize that the very nature of who we are, the very nature of reality itself, is being systematically kept from us, and we're being sold a fake one. A fake one that gets us to self-identify with our name as who we are, with our body as who we are, with our life story as who we are, our sex who we are, our color, race as who we are, where they're just experiences for the real self, which is infinite awareness having that experience. It's that infinite awareness, a state of being aware, that near-death experiencers talk about experiencing when they leave the body and they leave the lens, the vehicle, the biological computer that is decoding reality in a certain way. I mean, just think about it. The particles that make up your body actually exist in many places at the same time. They actually have no single location. The world that we think exists and is so real and we have to find solutions within is merely a construct in the brain. A small part of the brain that decodes information into visual information, electrical information into visual information. There is no out there as we perceive it. It's all going on in here when information is decoded, like a computer decoding the Wi-Fi. And what information we decode and the range of information we decode and the understanding that we decode depends on our own perceptions. If we have pea-sized perceptions of everything and pea-sized perceptions of ourselves, I'm just little me, what can I do? I've got no power. Then collectively, we are ripe for control by the few, and that's what's happened. And if we don't open our minds, and much else besides, and see beyond the program, see beyond the reality that we downloaded all our lives, and the sense of limitation, the sense of I can't, the sense that this physical five-sense world is all that exists, when in fact it only exists in a decoded part of the brain, then we'll live in a certain kind of world that is open to be controlled by a few of a certain kind of people. If we perceive the world to be a series of different races, different religions, different everything, then we can be manipulated into being divided and ruled between all those fault lines. I don't like you because you've got a different religion to me. I don't like you, you're a different colour to me. And all this bloody nonsense. I don't like you because you've said something that's just upset me. I want to save space. Then we'll live in a certain kind of world and be easily open to mass manipulation and mass control. Or we can look in the mirror or look beyond the program. And we can not only accept the concept that we are awareness having an experience, infinite awareness having an experience, but actually live from that perspective. That not that I'm David Icke, it's my experience currently, but that I am infinite awareness having that experience. And I could tell you from my own personal life and that of others I know and have met over the years, that when you move that point of self-identity from I am my body, my name, my income bracket, my background, my race, my religion, to I am infinite awareness having that experience, that movement of point of attention from the fragment of infinite awareness to a much greater swathe of it transforms not only your ability to see the world for what it is, it also transforms your perceptions of everything and your understanding of how you personally can make a contribution to making a difference in what we call solutions. And when people say, tell me what to do, tell us what to do, give us some solutions, that's the program speaking. Because when you go beyond what I call phantom self into a self-identity with infinite self, infinite awareness, then you know yourself how you can contribute and what you should do or could do to contribute to making a difference. And not only that, you have this passionate desire to do it. And so many use, well, what can we do? Give us some solutions as an excuse not to do anything. So the solution and the problem are indivisible, but people want to see the other. And, you know, if you're looking for solutions within a world that you think is solid, within a world you think is physically real, when actually it's just a decoded sense of reality in your brain, then where do you start? Where do you start finding solutions in a reality that's not even the reality you think it is? This world is a projection. It's a projection of something from the unseen, energetic information, perceptions, emotions that are projected from the unseen into this illusory physical reality. You're not going to find solutions to anything within this reality because it's just a movie. You're not going to find ways of changing the movie on a movie screen. You can complain all you like about the movie. The movie's the movie. You've got to go and find where the movie's being projected from, and then you change the movie, because the movie has to change if what it's projected from changes. And that means changing ourselves. It means looking in the mirror and saying, how am I contributing to what I want to challenge? You know, people talk about what are the solutions, and you see them on the internet and social media. Really vicious, aggressive. You're doing this, you're doing that with solutions. They're not all like that. Some are very respectful. Like I said, you get that. And that is classically part of the problem. This disunity, this desire to abuse, this classic divide and rule that people contribute to all the time, almost without exception. Everybody gets pulled into it in some level. Well, that's adding to the problem. So if we stop doing it, then we're adding to the solution or removing the problem, and thus changing the way the problem manifested. if we stopped abusing each other and fighting each other over religion and race and gender, not a bloody vehicle for divide and rule, that is now, then we're contributing to the change that needs to take place to stop what we don't like happening. And it's a choice, really, ironically, from what Stevie Sleuth said. It's a choice in the end between fear and love. Not love in the sense of attraction, but love in the greater, infinite sense. And we can make that choice whenever we like. We can look at information coming to light and we can say, that's frightening, shut up. So you're giving into fear. And where's that going to take us? Except deeper into what we don't like. Or you can come from a point of love in its infinite sense. Not I love you, darling, saw you down the disco. Love. Love that expresses itself far more through friendship than through physical attraction. Friends are normally always there no matter what. Those physically attracted, and what we call love, often are not there when they're needed. And so, coming from that point of love, it's, okay, you have that religion, that's fine, so long as you don't oppose it to anyone else. You have that religion, that's fine, so long as you don't oppose it to anyone else. You have that race, you have that race, well, okay, they're just vehicles for infinite awareness. We're all the same infinite awareness, they're just vehicles. You have that opinion, fine, I don't agree with it, but you have a right to have it. Oh, you want to say that? Well, I don't agree with what you're saying, but if I believe in free speech, then I agree that you should be able to say it. And then it can be debated. And so on and so on and so on it goes. All these things that are solutions staring us in the face. And but they pass people by because they want a list and minutes and stuff, like I say. The solutions are in the mirror. But how many people want to look there? How many people, when they realize that they could take responsibility and they could make contributions to circulating information that would give people the fix on what's going on, but they won't do it. And they won't do it because they don't want the consequences of doing it. They don't want the abuse. They don't want the dismissal. They don't want the ridicule. Well, don't do it then. But then don't say to me, where are the solutions? Because there they are, but don't want to go there. You know, when you wake up to another view of life, another understanding of what's actually happening behind all that appears to be happening, there's a responsibility in that as well. You know, that information is no good if it just stays with the one person and they stand on the other side of the street saying, yeah, I knew that was going to happen because that, yeah, well, where's that taking us? Nowhere. And we need to move to the next stage of all this, where people not only get a bigger understanding of what's going on, but then say, okay, well, how do I contribute to making a difference to it? And how am I making a difference, or how am I making a contribution to it at the moment, which I could change my behavior and attitudes and not then make. It's a time when people need to find the mirror and say, what am I doing? How am I contributing to the problem? How am I contributing to a solution to the problem? Instead of dismissing amazing, fantastic, extraordinarily importantly needed information coming to light as frightening people, and then saying externally, where are the solutions? Like I said earlier, how more positive can it be than to realize the idea of death is a myth, to control us, to frighten us, ironically? Well, the people behind this global conspiracy for mass human control are nothing if not predictable if you know what you're looking at. Way back in the 90s, I was warning about the agenda for human microchipping. And I said at that time that the then voluntary microchipping of dogs, domestic animals, was a case of the totalitarian tiptoe. First, it would be voluntary. Oh, there's no compulsion, don't worry about it. No, it's all voluntary. And then eventually they would make microchipping of dogs and other animals compulsory. And this is the process that's also being used to impose the microchipping of human beings, which I'll come to in a second. But I mention this today because of this story running in the newspapers this week. Dog microchipping law will see owners fined hundreds as 1 million pets are still not registered. You see, it's not voluntary anymore, just as it was never going to be. It's the totalitarian tiptoe. Do it bit by bit, and then they might not notice. An estimated 1.4 million of the UK's dogs are yet to be registered as the microchipping deadline looms. Thousands of dog owners are set to face fines of several £100s as more than 1 million dogs have still not been microchipped before the law is imposed to register them. 8 million dogs, apparently, have now been microchipped. Oh, it's the law, you got a microchip. All dogs must be microchipped under a new legal requirement which sees the creation of the National Canine Database, see Human Database. The new measures aim to create a central database listing every dog, brackets human, making every pet owner responsible for the registration. It is hoped this will reduce the number of dogs being dumped as well as the lucrative black market trade in animals. Now, every single law has at least two meanings. One is the meaning they tell you about so that you will accept it. Oh, no, it's good because these are all the benefits of it. And then there's another part of the law, the real reason for the law, which they don't tell you about, which is the totalitarian tiptoe here to human microchipping. It says the sterile microchip is roughly the size of a grain of rice and is implanted just under your dog's skin between its shoulder blades. Each chip contains a unique identification number that is listed on a national database which holds all the owner's contact details such as their address and phone number, brackets see humans. Lee Paris, campaigns manager at the charity The Dogs Trust. See, this is the thing. I have this phrase, my dot is the only dot. People look at their personal dot, their personal focus, and that's all they can see. They can't connect their dot to other dots to see the picture. And the picture here is not what this guy and people like him believe, that this is what microchipping of dogs is all about. It's actually about moving on step by step to the microchipping of humans. Anyway, he says, having a dog microchipped should give owners peace of mind Have your child microchipped, it will give you peace of mind. You'll be hearing that one. Because all dogs have the capacity to escape no matter how responsible the owner is. This will make it much easier to reunite worried owners with their pets. Knock it forward. This would help the state reunite with fugitives or people challenging the state or trying to get away from the state for what are they're doing and saying about the state. Microchips have been a legal requirement in Northern Ireland since 2012. Now England, Scotland and Wales are set to follow suit. Nearly 120,000 dogs are dumped or lost each year, and less than half of those are reunited with their owners. And this story in a national newspaper then goes on to give more reasons why microchipping your dog is a good thing. How long before they're telling us that microchipping humans and your children is a good thing. So what we're looking at is a process, the tiptoe process, which is mirroring that of dogs and animals, to introduce microchipping of humans voluntarily. It's already started, my goodness. And then to make it impossible virtually to function unless you're microchipped. I mean, take the example of the credit card. It's more and more difficult to function without a credit card, even if you don't want one. And that's the process of microchipping. To, first of all, it's voluntary, then making it almost impossible to function without one in terms of interacting with society. And then, like this, to make them compulsory. And we're seeing the most obvious sequence where people are being, pulled in on the fishing line without realizing that that's what's happening. So, first of all, you get people addicted to technology which they hold. Holdables, shall we call them. And of course, that part is massively already achieved. Oh yeah. So what you say? What you say? What? Can't take their eyes off the frickin' things. It's an addiction to holdables. Stage 1. Stage 2, wearables. All got names, these stages. Wearables. This is your Google Glass. This is your Bluetooth on your ear. This is your smart watch. Now, we've moved from here to on the skin, on the body. Ooh, getting closer now. And the next stage, they're already talking about it. It's already happening. Is what they call implantables. Microchips and other transhumanist technology. And the idea is that once you get this technology inside you, ooh, pull them in, ooh, yeah. Have you seen the latest smartphone? Ooh, yeah, Apple's got another one out. Ooh, you better queue in the middle of the night to get the first one. Once you have this technology inside you, you will be technologically connected to sources of thought, perception. That will mean that the human part of you is no more. Technology will be literally thinking for you. And I set all this out in my new book, Phantom Self, and put it in the context of the modern world and how it's happening before our eyes. And so when you look at the scale of surveillance that's happening now to protect us from terrorism, honest, it's extraordinary. Little list. First of all, not just getting your fingerprints, but getting them from 20 feet or more away through these technologies today. Mobile backscatter vans, where the authorities going around in unmarked vans, basically X-raying your car, your vehicle, anything they want to, just like when you're going through airports. And these are now being introduced. Never mind if you're in the way when they're X-raying something. Well, bad luck, mate. Better get down the hospital fast. Not that they'll help you. Unmanned drones. Now we're having drones being introduced. My goodness me, the scale that is being talked about will blow people away. They're even hijacking the sky now. And these are unmanned drones, some of them armed, that will be flying around with cameras, keeping surveillance on everybody. Protect us from terrorism. Honest. Then we've got biometrics, biometric databases where they keep surveillance on people based on their unique physical and behavioral traits. Biometrics comes from two Greek words meaning, in effect, measuring life. Automated license plate readers, cameras all over the place. So when your car goes past, they take your number plate, they know where you are. Face reading software. When you're not in a car, they know where you are. Data mining, all these massive taking of personal data. Street lights spying on us. Yes, they call them IntelliStreets. These are street lamps which will also project Wi-Fi everywhere. It's the idea anyway. That will have microphones listening to conversations in the street. Then there's, of course, internet activity, constantly under surveillance there. In terms of people that are not on their radar, they can go and find it if they choose to later, and people on their radar actually in real time, seeing what they're doing on the internet. Pre-crime surveillance cameras. These are cameras that are making judgments on whether you're likely to commit a crime or not. And the idea is that you get arrested early, before you do it, even though you weren't going to do it. And we have now, we have these cameras and biometrics and all these forms of surveillance and security in schools getting more and more extreme. And all that is getting children and young people used to constant total surveillance so that it becomes their norm. So when they go out into an adult world, by which time it will be big time further on than we are now in terms of surveillance, these technologies and new ones come in all the time, that they won't, this is the idea, they won't react against it, they won't challenge it, they won't question it, because they've been brought up surrounded by it in the schools, thus it's their norm. And this is what's happening. We shouldn't forget that. You know, I was born in 1952, before all this really in-your-face stuff started. So I'm able to have a perspective from seeing what was to seeing what is. Young people coming into the world now, this is their norm. And it's fantastic that so many young people are actually seeing it and challenging it despite that. And we are told that all of this constant 24/7 surveillance with now telescreens, Orwell's telescreens, now called smart TVs, that can film you in your own home, with smart phones that can keep surveillance on you wherever you go. And by the way, the smart TVs are only Mark 1 of this. Wait till the next lot and the next lot and the next lot come out with more and more surveillance capability in your own home. So we're told all of this is to protect us from terrorism. And that's one of the benefits of this mass of state-sponsored, state-organized, state-engineered terrorism. It's to provide an excuse, other reasons too, that benefit this agenda for global control. But one is they can then justify more and more of this nonsense that people say, oh, well, I know I don't like it, but we've got to be protected from the terrorists. Well, let's put this in perspective. It's about time. This is an article from the New Yorker. In 2014, terrorist attacks caused just 37 deaths in Western countries, 0.11% of the global tally. Yes, the numbers go up and they go down year by year, but there's a figure that puts in perspective the kind of numbers and the area of numbers we're talking about. 37 died from terrorist attacks in Western countries in 2014, and then take into account that much of the terrorism is state created as a create the problem to offer the solution scenario. During the 15 years from 2000 to 2014, the vast majority of these deaths resulted from terrorism in the West, resulted from 4 incidents: the 9/11 attacks in the United States, the 2004 train bombings in Madrid, the transit bombings in London in 2005, and the 2011 gun massacre and bombing in Norway. Every single one of those has massive questions. I mean, 9/11, don't start me. Massive questions and blatant discrepancies, often of a blatant variety in terms of the official story of what is supposed to have happened there. But let's just contrast that. 2014, 37 people in Western countries died from terrorist attacks. Figures from the European Society for Cardiology for cardiovascular disease in Europe in the same year, 2014. Deaths from various forms of cardiovascular disease in Europe alone, never mind the United States and other Western countries, 1.3 million compared with 37. And there was another 700,000 died from cardiovascular disease in the United States as well. Cancer deaths in America alone, never mind the other Western countries in Europe, more than 500,000 a year. Deaths on American roads in 2014, more than 32,000, and that's without all the other countries in the West. Deaths from alcohol in the United States alone every year, 88,000. Number of deaths in 2014 in Western countries from terrorism, including state-sponsored terrorism, 37. Anti-terrorism spending 50,000 times more than any other cause of death. The US spends more than $500 million per victim on anti-terrorism efforts. However, cancer research spending is only $10,000 per victim. Evolutionary psychology, this article says, may offer an explanation for this irrational threat amplification. You don't need all that stuff. It's because the conspiracy wants all the spending to protect us from terrorism, because it's not protecting us from terrorism, it's building the global surveillance control system state. And it wants people to die once they can't serve the system anymore, when they get older. And thus, as one insider says, they might as well die of cancer as something else. Thus, the fantastic discrepancy on spending between protecting from terrorism and protecting from cancer. The article goes on to the least likely means of death mentioned here, terrorism. The federal government devotes about $150 billion annually. On the other hand, to combat the most likely cause of death, heart disease, the government contributes only $2 billion. $2 billion as opposed to $150 billion. And just $300 million is devoted to research on the third most likely cause of death, strokes. And it concludes, so looking at it another way, we spend $500 million for every death from terrorism and only $2,000 for every death resulting from strokes. That means we spend 250,000 times more per death on terrorism. And then we are told that we must fight terrorism as well as keep people under total surveillance to protect them from terrorism. We must fight terrorism because we must stop people being killed. Really. Deaths from fighting terrorism compared with terrorism itself. In 2014, terrorist attacks caused just 37 deaths in Western countries, 0.11% of the global tally. Relative to this year, that was relatively peaceful, but it's a figure that can be used to compare the vast differences that I'm highlighting here. The Washington, D.C.-based Physicians for Social Responsibility released a landmark study concluding that the death toll from 10 years of the war on terror since the 9/11 attacks is at least 1.3 million and could be as high as 2 million. According to other figures, total deaths from Western interventions in Iraq and Afghanistan since the 1990s, from direct killings and the longer-term impact of war-imposed deprivation, are likely to constitute around 4 million people, and could be as high as 6 to 8 million people when accounting for higher avoidable death estimates in Afghanistan. Such figures could well be too high, it says, but we'll never know for sure. Why not? Because US and UK armed forces, as a matter of policy, refuse to keep track of the civilian death toll of military operations. They are an irrelevant inconvenience. Due to the severe lack of data in Iraq, almost complete non-existence of records in Afghanistan, and the indifference of Western governments to civilian deaths, it is literally impossible to determine the true extent of loss of life. So, even on guesstimates, the number of people who have been killed in the war and by the war against terrorism is in the millions and millions and millions. Whereas a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of that, even tinier if you take away state-sponsored terrorism, has killed people through terrorism itself. Now, of course, if one person gets killed by terrorism, it's terrible. But putting it all in perspective, the idea that this emerging, so fast emerging, surveillance global state is to protect people from terrorism is ludicrous. It is there to build the control system, the total control system, down to the fine detail of people's lives. And of course, the migrant crisis, opening the doors like Chancellor Merkel in Germany, just opening the doors, no matter what, and no matter who, has opened many things. But it's certainly opened, as I pointed out at the time when it started, it's opened the opportunity to say, well, we've got all these people now, all these Muslims coming into Europe, and among them are terrorists and jihadists. So we have to have more surveillance, more control to protect you from them. It's so blatant when you connect the dots. So this week, here's a headline: staggering number of European jihadists. EU's own agency admits terrorists are exploiting migrant crisis as illegal border crossings hit record 1.82 million. I remember doing an interview just as this migrant crisis started and pointing out that this was coming. Oh, there's all these jihadists now in Europe because of this, and we've got to do this and that and the other to protect you from them. And just another excuse to put the agenda forward and into even greater overdrive. Mass migration is allowing terrorists to sneak into the EU, its own border agency admitted last night, wants you to believe. In a devastating report, it said the Paris attacks proved jihadists were exploiting the refugee crisis. The Frontex agency logged a record 1.82 million illegal crossings into the EU last year, 6 times more than in 2014. But it said it had no idea how many illegal immigrants were, and there were, and in any case, had no way of tracing their movements inside the EU. Officials also warned a staggering number of European citizens had become jihadists and were taking advantage of lax border controls. Problem, reaction, solution. And with the whole transhumanist agenda, which is coming in all the time via holdables, wearables, implantables, the scale of human control down to thought and emotion even is planned eventually to be total. And we look at people in the system, vast numbers of people in the system, in uniforms and caps of law enforcement, etc., security, in the dark suit, bureaucratic web in every country. And the vast majority of them are introducing and enforcing these laws, these surveillance technologies, and the daily destruction of more and more of the most basic freedoms, while having no idea whatsoever of the consequences and the agenda that they are creating and serving. There, again, classic examples of my dot is the only dot. And yet, every day, they are contributing to not only their own enslavement and the enslavement of people here today, adults today, but this is not where it's meant to end. This is where it is now. And if people think it's bad now, what's it going to be like for their children and grandchildren by the time they're adults? And it's so important that young people today who are old enough to be able to have a voice focus on this, because it's their world we're talking about. I mean, it's our world already with all this stuff already going on and will continue to go on among or during the lives of older people. But young people, people in the schools, in the colleges and universities and elsewhere, this is your world we are seeing being constructed. If you don't focus on it now, then when are you going to do it? Further down the line, when there's more surveillance, more control, and challenging it gets more and more difficult? That's the same for everybody. When are we going to draw the line and then start running the line back? There's billions of people in the world. The number of people who are driving this in full knowledge that they're driving it and where they want it to go is tiny, tiny compared with that. So anyone who gets access to this information and then thinks the way to respond is to watch something by Simon Cowell, some game show or whatever, or whatever diversion, and not actually focus on what matters, which is their own freedom disappearing by the day, then they'll just have to live with what's coming if nothing is done. And we are now looking at increasing efforts at censorship. You know, I've come across it with Facebook and others, to stop information alerting people to what the plan is, not just in terms of surveillance, but across the great spectrum of this transformation of society into a post-human state. And thus, this is not going to just, like I say, stop here, this censorship, here and no further. It's going to go on. They're going to try to eventually silence everybody. I mean, what have we come to when, you know, the Green Party, that's supposed to be this liberal political party about freedom, that wants to silence and have silenced in the media people challenging the lie of human-caused global warming. And so what we're looking at now are the people you would expect to be defending freedom who are actually calling for freedom to be deleted. Look at what's happening in colleges and universities in the West, where once upon a time, when I was a kid, students went on marches demanding freedom of speech. Now they go out protesting against freedom of speech. Oh, no, I want a safe space. Don't want to be upset. We had a situation of last week where students at a college in America said they were literally traumatized by seeing that someone had written Trump 2016 in chalk on the pavement. We're going through a genetic mutation where people are born without backbones. And while all this is going on, their freedoms are being taken away all the time. We're taking your freedoms away, but we're going to give you a safe space. You won't be upset anymore because now we've got control of your mind and your emotions. We can stop you being upset about anything or thinking about anything worth thinking about. The scale of this human control, I mean, you just get into the transhumanist side of this and you'll see it's eventually, indeed it's already happening, about control of thought and control of emotion. So there's no human left. And here we are. Here we are, facing all this. And every day I watch the explosion of divide and rule, playing white people off against black people, Muslims off against Christians, Hindus and Jews, and all these labels for people. They're all played off against each other. It's the Muslims, it's the so-and-so, it's the so-and-so. And yet, does anyone think that only white people are going to be microchipped? Or only Muslims, or only Hindus? It's everybody. We're all in this together, and the divide and rule is to stop us coming together to, in unity, say enough. Well, unless we do, and fast, there's going to be a time of colossal mass regret that we didn't do so. This is not something that's sometime never over the rainbow. This is happening now, and it's happening in more extreme terms all the time. And as the realm of the seen is, again, an expression of this unseen, then you must have the same thing here as you have in the quantum realm. That is, everything is connected in some way. And when you get into the nature of this web, you're looking at seriously obvious connections between everything. There is a spider, a force in the center of the web that dictates the direction and the behavior, the decisions, the actions of those attached to the web. And so you can get to the outer part of the web, and things will be happening in government, in banking, in media, in all these institutions that appear again to be random, appear to be unconnected. But actually, if you take it back, it's all being directed from this central force. And how the web works is this. You've got the spider, the dictating force that I talk about at length in my books, at the center. And immediately around the spider, you've got the most exclusive secret societies and secret groupings. And within the web itself, only that exclusive area close to the spider actually has the full picture of what's going on, or at least near the full picture of what's going on. And as you come out from the spider, you go into the realms of secret societies that we know about, into the Freemasons, into the Knights Templar and the Jesuit order at its inner core, and so on. They operate in the public arena in terms of the fact that they are known about, but of course what goes on inside is not largely known about. And when I talk about the Freemasons, I'm not talking about every Freemason. This web is fiercely compartmentalized. So, as I say, people out here in the web will not largely know there is a bloody spider. Never mind it's coordinating what's going on around them and what they're doing. And in the same way, these individual organizations within the web are compartmentalized. So you look at the Freemasons and you've got these levels of degree. And you only know the next level of knowledge once that level accepts you that you can become part of it. Otherwise, you stay at the lower levels and in ignorance of what goes on there. And it goes on and on up the pyramid, if you like, until you find the very few at the top who actually know what it's all about in terms of the secret society or the organization. The rest of them just know a bit. Down the bottom, know very little. So you continue to come out from the spider, and eventually you reach a point some way out where the hidden meets the seen. And at that point, you see organizations like the Bilderberg Group, the Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission, the Club of Rome. They are cusp organizations, as I call them, which are at that point where the direction, the agenda dictated by the spider from the hidden enters the scene. So through these organizations and others, this agenda is coordinated and communicated into the organizations that we do see. These are governments, government agencies, banks, media organizations, all again fiercely compartmentalized, so the vast majority within them have no idea what the few at the top in those organizations know. And in this way, you can coordinate a whole global direction for the world in country after country after country, while the vast majority who are working to make that happen because they're just doing their job have no idea that there is any coordination because they are compartmentalized from that knowledge. And so you see things happening in this country or that country or this culture or that culture which appear to be decisions made within that arena, that country. But in fact, it's centrally coordinated, just like a transnational corporation has a headquarters and then dictates to all its subsidiaries, which all follow the diktat and the policy, if you like, of the headquarters. And if you can have access to this web in some form and get access to what its game is, what its agenda is, that's when you can start predicting the future with great accuracy. Not because you're sitting in a darkened room, pulling things out of the ether, but because if the agenda of this network is not stopped, if something does not intervene to stop it, then it's going to happen, it's going to play out. And so if you can get access to what that agenda is, either by being an insider or by doing decades of research, then again, unless something intervenes to stop it, you can say this is what is very likely to happen. And again, you can be proved right because there's not been this intervention to stop the process playing out. And so what you have is basically two hierarchies. You have the hierarchy in the scene, which we call presidents, prime ministers, government ministers, heads of banks and corporations and media operations. But that's not the real hierarchy. The real hierarchy of power is in the unseen realms of this web. And those in the hierarchy of the seen are merely there to give people the illusion that what they see is what they get, and that somehow voting for this party or this person or that person is influencing what's going on in some way. Overwhelmingly, it's not, because that's not where the power is, only where we're manipulated to believe the power is. And so we have, well, this week of all weeks, we've had the 90th birthday of the Queen, who is the head of state in the United Kingdom and many Commonwealth countries. And she appears to therefore be at the top of the hierarchy in those countries. But if you go into the hidden and that hierarchy, the royal family may be up there, but they're nowhere near running the show or at the top of the hierarchy with the real power. And everyone, even the royals who are serving the web, are expendable to it, no matter whether you're in politics or banking or business or whatever. While what you do is beneficial to the agenda of the web, then you'll be looked after and you'll be protected. You will, for instance, be protected often in terms of your own health. I mean, look at some of these classic web people, like the Queen. She just turned 90. You got her mother, who died at the best part of 102. You've got Prince Philip, who's, 94. You've got David Rockefeller, massive web person, who's 100. Henry Kissinger, 92. And so it goes on. And the reason is because they are web people, in knowledge that they don't get the same treatment that the rest of the population do. And they'll be protected from scandals, and they'll be protected from things that could bring them down until they become expendable to the agenda, and then away you go. What happens doesn't really matter to the web. All it matters to that is that its agenda keeps playing out. And you see the web at work in so many endless ways every day. You have the coordination of wars, where these different people in different countries all come together supporting the same thing that brings about a war. Or they'll support the perception that this regime is evil and must be removed because the web wants it removed. And you see it at the moment so clearly in this debate that's going on in relation to the European Union referendum in Britain over whether the public should vote to stay in the EU or vote to come out. And it's funny, really, because we got 60 odd million people in this country, and it's supposed to be a massive public debate on whether we stay in or whether we come out. And yet you look at the two groupings that are leading this debate, who are the major personalities of this debate, which are always being quoted and counter-quoted in the media. And it's a very small world indeed. On one side, you've got the Prime Minister David Cameron and his Chancellor of the Exchequer, George Osborne. And on the other, the major personality is a bloke called Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson is talking about the need to come out, and the other two, the need to stay in. Now, the Web wants the UK to stay in because its agenda is pulling more and more countries into the European Union and focusing more and more power at the centre to create this massive dictatorship, bureaucratic dictatorship. It's all part of its agenda, as I've written and talked about elsewhere. So the last thing it wants is for the British public to vote to come out. And here we have, on this postage stamp debate, we have David Cameron on one side, Boris Johnson on the other, who went to Eton College in the same period. Eton College, this elite college near Windsor Castle, where the royal children go. And they were both members at the same time at Oxford University of something called the Bullingdon Club, which is a dining club for students with very rich parents. And it's infamous for trashing restaurants and trashing other places, just jolly japes. And then the rich parents write the cheque to cover the damage. And another member of the Bullingdon Club was George Osborne, who's the buddy of Cameron pressing people to stay in the EU. So it's a very small world indeed, where at the centre of this debate about whether we should come out or stay in. Then, just arrived in this country as I speak, we have Barack Obama. Now he's another web person, owned by the web, controlled by the web, put into power by the web to serve the interests of the web, just like George Bush before him and him before him and him before him, etc. And he is saying that Britain should vote to stay in the EU. It's none of his bloody business. But he's a web person, so he's serving the interests of the web, which is to stay in. And this is a story very soon after he arrived in a British newspaper. Barack Obama visit UK more effective at fighting terror inside the EU. The web uses the terror thing all the time to get people to be frightened into doing its will. And even with the EU, play the terror card. And it says the UK's ability to fight terrorism would be more effective if it sticks together with its European allies, President Obama has said. He said, being inside the EU magnifies Britain's influence across the world. It's got no influence in the EU. Boris Johnson, for it is he, said President Obama's view was a breathtaking example of the principle of do as I say, but not as I do. No. That's what it may appear to be in the seen. But in the hidden, it's do as we tell you to do. Okay, yeah, you'd be better in the EU. Obama said that he recognised ultimately the matter was for British voters to decide for themselves. They always throw that one in. oh, you must stay in, all these are the terrible things if you don't stay in. But of course, it's your choice. The outcome of your decision matter for the British people, he said, but it's also a matter of deep interest to the United States. And then, outrageously, he tries to exploit the mass killing of Americans, as with vaster numbers of others, actually, in the world wars. Wars that were demonstrably, provably engineered by the same web that holds Obama by the dangly bits to serve its interest of continual and massive centralization of power, which is what the two world wars did. And it's continued since. What he said was, the tens of thousands of Americans who rest in Europe's cemeteries are a silent testament to just how intertwined our prosperity and security truly are. And the path you choose now will echo in the prospects of today's generations of Americans as well. No, it won't. Whether Britain is in or out the EU doesn't matter. But say anything, because the web demands it, to keep Britain in the EU, because that's what the web wants. We've had not just Obama, but a stream of people coming out, web people again, trying to get the vote result that they want. And we've had a series of former US Treasury secretaries who've come out and said, oh, you must stay in, oh, it'll be terrible if you don't, basically. And it's interesting to see who they are. One of them is George Schultz, or George Schultz. Another one of these blokes, he's 95. And he was in the Nixon administration. And he was also Secretary of State to Ronald Reagan. And he's in many of my books because he's a web person to his DNA. Then there's Robert Rubin. He was Bill Clinton's Treasury Secretary. And he worked with the head of the Federal Reserve, Alan Greenspan, and others like Timothy Geithner and Lawrence Summers, to deregulate the financial arena, remove checks and balances, which led, in an engineered, coordinated way, to the financial crash of 2008. Now, which of course allowed the transfer of fantastic amounts of money from people through governments to this elite, this web elite, through bailouts. And then here's two others on this list saying, oh, you must stay in the EU. Well, because they care about the British people. I mean, here they are. Lawrence Summers and Timothy Geithner, who worked with Rubin and Greenspan to bring about the crash of 2008. Lawrence Summers was in the Clinton administration. Timothy Geithner was Treasury Secretary to President Obama. And what happened is that after the crash of 2008, Obama brought in Summers and Geithner, who played a significant part in bringing about the crash, to be his financial wizards to sort out the crash. And how did they decide it was going to be sorted out? By giving the banks they represent vast amounts of money, which then justified austerity All this money to the banks, we ain't got no money. And there's another on the list, is Henry Paulson. He was the Treasury Secretary to Boy George Bush when the crash happened. And he's the former chairman and CEO of Goldman Sachs. So he's a guy to be trusted. And he was the person who immediately reacted to the crash in the latter period of Bush. And he decided, ooh, the only way out of this is giving vast amounts of money to the banks. So these are the people, again, web people, all coordinated, that are being brought out to try to frighten the British public into doing the will of the web. We've had the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, which, like the World Bank and these other institutions, the World Trade Organization, the World Health Organization, they're all creations of the web to serve the interests of the web. So, of course, the IMF's going to come out and say, oh, God, it'd be terrible if you came out of the EU. And then you've got Mark Carney, who's the head of the Bank of England, Canadian bloke. He's gone as far as he can get away with to also try to say, oh, it'll be terrible coming out. Because another web person who, like other heads of central banks, is coordinated in terms of coordinated policy, common policy, through something called the Bank of, or the Bank for International Settlements in Basel, Switzerland. Another web organization designed to coordinate financial policy between central banks that push the world in a certain direction. We've had the British Treasury, headed by George Osborne, coming out and saying how bad it will be if we leave the EU. Again, serving the interests of the web. And when you look at this example of the EU referendum, you see the political hierarchy, the political establishment, and the Labour Party, the Liberal Democrats and the Greens, etc., the Scottish National Party, who's supposed to be anti-system, well, they should be ashamed of themselves, frankly, because they're serving the system by supporting the web in saying Britain should stay in the EU. But when you look at the political establishment, then you look at the super rich and the financial establishment, all these expressions of the web are coming out in support of staying in the EU, and that's because that's what the web wants. And so we face a situation in terms of the British public where we either go on allowing this network to dictate our lives and dictate how we vote in this referendum, or we open our minds to what's really going on, have some backbone, and do what the web doesn't want us to do. And, let's have no, illusion that if Britain does vote to come out, well, the web, through the EU and other institutions, is not going to go quietly. It's going to do everything it can to make sure that people reconsider in the light of events which they will create. And then they'll come back and say, well, let's have another referendum, see if you want to go back in, and reverse the other one. They've done it so many times. So the referendum is only the start of this, really, if it goes against what the web wants. But surely it's time to draw a line and say here and no further, and stop being dictated to by a hidden hand with a nightmare agenda for the world, and start to look it in the eye and say, whatever it takes, we're not having it anymore. And when you realize that this web exists and how it works and what its agenda is, the world looks a very, very different place, and world events can be seen in a very, very different light. And that's why getting this information out about how it all unfolds is so important. And I can see from, in my own experience over the last 25 years, how more and more people are starting to get it, are starting to see it, are starting to see how the game unfolds, and thus ceasing in ever greater numbers to be fooled and manipulated by it in the way they were before. And but that comes with responsibility. Responsibility being, even if we don't like some of the consequences, we have to do what is necessary to stop this web dictating the agenda for the world that it's worked towards for so long. And only one of the ways we can do that in Britain is to vote to come out of the EU. If you want to know and ensure the outcome of a football match before the first ball is kicked, what do you have to do? Well, the answer, of course, is you have to control both sides and you have to control the referee. Because if you only control one team, you will influence the game, the outcome, but you won't know what it's going to be before the game starts. And so anyone who wishes to control an outcome in any situation must control both sides and the referee, the rules, the game itself, or in other situations, multiple sides, whatever they may be. And that is how the cabal that dictates the direction of the world and dictates major society transforming world events runs its game. You know, there's this idea among many people who, even those that accept that there is this cabal, that they basically work through the rich and famous, the establishment. But if they only did that, they wouldn't be controlling all aspects of what they wanted to dictate to achieve the outcome. And what a lot of people don't realize and do not appreciate is that if you take the political spectrum, they manipulate those that are of the left, of what have become known as progressives, progressive people, progressive organizations, which is about campaigning for freedom and justice and fairness and what have you. That arena is targeted just as much by this cabal as the establishment. In fact, so much of what has become known as the progressive arena, progressive organizations, have actually, and progressive political parties, have become part of the establishment while thinking they're challenging it. And I've spent much of my life, certainly the last more than a quarter of a century, campaigning daily in many and various ways for freedom, protection of freedom, for justice, for fairness, for all the things that these progressive groups of the left would support. But if we're not streetwise, and if we don't research what's really going on, we don't understand what the game really is, and much of the left and progressives will dismiss any idea of some global conspiracy. If we don't understand that, then we can be played like a stringed instrument by the very forces that we think we are protesting against. And I'm going to talk about this, both sides of the Atlantic, today. And if the left, the progressives, don't start to understand and take the trouble to find out how the game is played and who's behind the game, then they'll go on being manipulated to do what the game wants them to do while they think they're challenging the establishment. First of all, this side of the water in Britain. We're having this EU referendum in June to decide if the British people want to stay in the European Union or come out. Now, as I've been pointing out for decade after decade, the European Union was created from the start to be totalitarian, tiptoed step by step into what it's become and what it's meant to become, even more so. And that is a centralized fascist communist dictatorship run by dark suit bureaucrats on behalf of the hidden hand, to take away national sovereignty, to break Europe up into regions, to dictate everything from a central point in Brussels, to control the entirety of the European economy and finance, and to become a state in and of itself, with what we now call countries subordinate satellites to this power structure. It's bad for everyone except those that are at the core running it and those behind those who appear to be running it. And so it is sickening to my bone marrow to witness the grotesque sight of so-called progressive political parties in this country. The Labour Party, the Scottish National Party, the Liberal Democrats, the Greens, all united in their desire to persuade the British people to vote to stay in that little lot, the EU. Now, some of them, key people here and there, mostly in the shadows, will know what the European Union is really about and will be campaigning through these organisations, not just the parties but others I'll come to in a second, to bring about this outcome of staying in the EU. But the vast majority of people in those parties and these other groups, progressive groups, will be campaigning to stay in the EU because they are completely ignorant of what the EU is about, what it's there to do, what its intentions are, and how it's been orchestrated to be what it is now and what it is designed to become from the day that it was created as a free trade area. As Martin Luther King said, there is nothing in the world more dangerous than conscientious ignorance and sincere ignorance. So, we had the leader of the British Labour Party, the opposition party, the main opposition party in the London Parliament, Westminster Parliament, Jeremy Corbyn, who has spent his political career up to this point opposing the European Union and pointing out very correctly what the organisation is really about. And this week he made a speech supporting Britain staying in the EU. And he now stands alongside all those other so-called progressive parties and the Cameron wing of the Conservative Party. And you would find it very difficult to get those parties to agree on almost anything else. And yet, here they are, all agreed to stay in this grotesque destroyer of freedom, and we've seen nothing yet. And you'll see also other progressive groups. Take Friends of the Earth, for instance, the environmental campaigning group, but so many others who support staying in the EU and yet are funded to a fantastic extent collectively by the EU. Here we have Friends of the Earth Europe, for instance, that gets massive funding from the European Union, and we're asked to believe that that does not influence its decision to campaign and try to get its members around the country to campaign to keep Britain in the EU. There are the number of organisations that the European Union funds is unbelievable. And then what happens is when there's a problem and the EU needs support, like now in this referendum, all these organisations come out and say, oh, we ought to stay in the EU, yeah, it's good, without mentioning that they're all on the payroll. So what's happened is that the EU has funded all these groups, bought them basically, and then it gets the groups it funds to campaign for it to do things with regard to the particular subject area involved that mean that the EU takes more power to the centre to deal with these situations that these EU-funded groups are demanding that they deal with. It's a complete stitch-up wherever you look. We have politicians campaigning to stay in the EU who say, oh, look at all these groups that are supporting staying in. What they don't mention is that these groups are funded by the EU. Therefore, they have something to lose if we come out and take our freedom back, or some of it. We have the BBC that is at the centre in the mainstream media in this country, at the centre of this whole in-out debate, that takes funding from the EU. Took a Freedom of Information request to pull it out of them. How can you be independent of the EU in a debate when you're taking funding from it? And then there's this Friends of the Earth round document that was sent around to all the members of Friends of the Earth, demanding or asking, encouraging that other members around the country campaign to stay in the EU. And they're saying, if you'd like to send us, we'd like you to have campaigning materials such as leaflets, and if you're organising an event, we'll try to get a speaker there. It's all orchestrated by what should be an environmental group to keep us in the EU. And it says here, Friends of the Earth is proudly party politically impartial. We tell it like it is. All right, okay, yes. No matter who is in government or opposition. But it says campaigning for an in vote in June's referendum is completely consistent with Friends of the Earth's commitment to political impartiality. What they're talking about is party political impartiality. What they're campaigning for is a political position, a fundamentally political position to decide what form of government makes the laws in this country. How much more political can you get? And then we have former EU commissioners, former Labour Party politicians, for instance, Lord Mandelson and Neil Kinnock, coming out and saying we must stay in. What they don't tell you is that they are subject to rules and regulations to protect their EU pensions. This is a story from the Daily Telegraph. European rules show that if Mandelson, in this case, speaks out against Europe as a former commissioner, he could be stripped of his pension altogether. Documents seen by campaigners show that Lord Mandelson and other commissioners, like Kinnock, have to abide by certain obligations, quote, both during and after their term of office. One of these obligations as a staff member of the Commission is to maintain a duty of loyalty to the communities. If they fail to demonstrate loyalty to the EU, Lord Mandelson and these others can, quote, be deprived of his right to a pension or other benefits, the rules say. Did the EU-funded BBC ask the EU-funded Kinnock and Mandelson about this conflict of interest? Not to my knowledge, they didn't. And we've had calls this week for children, as a matter of course in schools, to be taught the benefits of being in the European Union. Wherever you look, this organisation is stitching up the game by controlling, through funding not least, all sides. And when not by funding, by ignorance of what the game is. And then when we go across to the progressive arena in the United States, we find a similar situation. The Arab Spring, these apparently spontaneous people's revolutions in the Middle East, which have caused devastation in their consequences. And when you do any modicum of research, you see that it was orchestrated from the start to use a people's revolution to target a regime that the cabal wanted to change. And how these revolutionaries, some of them genuine, but again in ignorance of the game, and the others, mercenaries, many of them, were funded, armed and trained by the West to go about their business apparently in a spontaneous revolution of the people to target these regimes and people they wanted to remove. Well, one of the key networks that specializes in training people in civil resistance and disobedience is the Open Society network of a billionaire financier and cabal to his DNA called George Soros. As I speak, there is something going on in Washington, D.C. called Democracy Spring, alongside something called Democracy Awakening. And these are people who have been invited to training sessions in the art of civil disobedience, etc., and are protesting, the vast majority quite genuinely, against big business and big money influence in American politics. How many of them, however, know that so many of these organizations in these coalitions that go under these names like Democracy Spring and Democracy Awakening are funded by Soros's Open Society network, the same network that funded the clearly disastrous and premeditated Arab Spring, as it was called. Here is well, there's pages and pages and pages of it, and it's a list, one after the other, after the other, after the other, of progressive organizations funded by George Soros. George Soros has no interest whatsoever in human freedom and human rights, or any of the stuff that these organizations, and in most of their members' case, genuinely believe in. So why is he funding them? I mean, I'm not just saying, here's 10 quid, here's $50. We're talking hundreds of millions of dollars that he puts into these organizations, with whose members he will, in fact, have nothing in common at all in terms of what he'd like the world to be. There's an organization called Human Rights Watch. There's a progressive organization for you, human rights. Quite right. Soros, who wouldn't know a human right if it bit him on the arse, gave Human Rights Watch $100 million. Why? Rewind to the start. How do you dictate the outcome of a game before the game starts? You control, direct, manipulate all sides. And those of us, and I share so much in terms of what I would like to happen with the genuine people in these progressive groups. But what needs to happen if it's going to be effective is people need to get informed, and they need to get streetwise about how the world's manipulated, to what end, and see the personalities like Soros that just pop up everywhere. Why Why are we having a situation where Democracy Spring is demanding that big money and billionaires get out of buying politics and buying influence, when they are connected so fundamentally to billionaire George Soros, who has made an art form out of buying political influence? He supported Obama. That worked, didn't it? In terms of changing anything. And he's supporting Hillary Clinton. And someone else is supporting Hillary Clinton, a man called Robert Kagan, co-founder of something called the Project for the New American Century, known as the neocons in America, who were behind the Bush administration at the time of 9/11, and I've gone into all that elsewhere. Kagan and these neocons are as anti-progressive as you could possibly imagine. But they're supporting Clinton. And Soros, who's funding all these progressive groups, oh, he's progressive, old George, is supporting Clinton. And Clinton is the person they want for the next president, to front up these people in the background like Soros to carry out their agenda when in office. And how many of these progressive groups are supporting Clinton also, when she is, well, I would call her evil, except that evil would probably sue for defamation of character. It's sickening to observe it all. All these people who are campaigning for action on climate change, which are just the changes in society that this cabal wants. There's Friends of the Earth campaigning for action by the EU on climate change, which the EU wants to take because it's part of the same agenda, while being funded by the EU. And unless, like I say, people who are genuinely in pursuit of a fairer, more just and freer world, unless they get informed and get out of their box, stop getting their information from the mainstream media and go and find it elsewhere, because it exists in great amounts if only people would look. Unless they do that, they're going to go on thinking they're making a difference, thinking they are protesting against the system, the state, the establishment. Well, the establishment and the cabal are doing that. This whole progressive arena needs to get informed and needs to grow up much